So my name is Eli Asarian. I'm with Riverbend Sciences in Eureka, and I'm also on the KBMP steering committee. And so I'm going to be introducing the speakers here in this late afternoon session. And our first speaker is Dan Shelby. He's working on his PhD in water resources engineering at Oregon State University. And he's going to be talking about some surveys that he's done regarding people's concerns over dam removal. So, Dan.
Perfect. Thanks for the intro, Eli. So like you said, my name is Dan Shelby. I'm a PhD candidate in water resources engineering at Oregon State. I'm working with Desiree Toulos and the Dam Removal and River Restoration Lab. I also work for Confluence Research and Consulting, a small firm specializing in natural resources and recreation management. Fun fact, Confluence was hired to do a whitewater boating controlled flow study back in 2001 as part of the original relicensing effort that eventually ended in dam removal. That was before my time. I was involved in a focused assessment of post-removal flows back in 2020. And that project is kind of how I got interested in dam removal. And all the pictures on my slides are from that study, if you're curious. But today I'm going to be telling you about a social science survey that I'm working on for my dissertation, which some of you may have already seen in your inbox. Risk is the chance of an outcome that harms people, places, wildlife, or project objectives. Risk assessment is the process of understanding these risks and thinking about ways to mitigate or control them. KRRC has already done a technical risk assessment focused on project-related economic liabilities, and perceived risk assessment adds another dimension to that. And because people can have concerns about project-related risks that are not addressed in technical risk assessment. And understanding those risks can assist future dam removals by improving risk communication and establishing restoration goals that people care about. The survey went out to 650 members of the KBMP mailing list and some of my personal contacts this fall. It's not really possible for me to track subsamples, but it's safe to say that my 50 complete responses are mostly from KBMP members. So we can think of this sample as roughly representative of the people in this room. Part one of the survey asks participants to rate importance for 42 risks that were possible at the start of the survey. Asking about importance lets people respond based on their personal values rather than economic or liability focused metrics. Part one also has some free response items so people get a chance to talk about any risks that we may not have included in the survey. Part two asks a few questions about participants' expertise so we can help us sort responses into groups and also so that we can understand the sample. And I also want to mention that we did make the survey completely anonymous. We wanted to make sure to protect any possibly sensitive groups like employees working on dam removal. So the survey doesn't collect your name or any personal information, IP address, location, or anything like that. Participants can optionally provide their email address, but if they do, they're directed to a completely separate survey to prevent response association. Moving on to some preliminary results. I want to mention I'm going to be doing a much more in-depth analysis once I'm done sampling, which will include some comparisons between the data set and the KRRC risk register. I'm also going to be covering some topics pretty lightly here today, but there are a few more figures after my final slide if you want to look at them later. So as you can see right now, the sample is skewed towards folks with ecological knowledge and folks in other scientific disciplines. I'm really hoping to expand the sample eventually to include more folks that have engineering, construction, or cultural resources expertise. these are the risk categories. So, and the categories are ranked in order from based on their average important ratings of the combined individual items. Environmental risks involve existing or future biological, cultural, and environmental conditions. I split environmental risks into two categories, those that mention specific fish and wildlife species and others. Operations and maintenance risks are related to post-construction project performance and maintenance. Design risks are related to design and performance of the project. Construction risks involve actual construction and demolition of the project, including labor, equipment, material, known site conditions, and site safety. External risks are outside of project control, such as unforeseen site conditions or forces of nature. Organizational risks include project organization, governance, and financing. These are all of the risk categories in the KRRC risk register, although I did omit or combine some individual risks for my survey to make it a little bit shorter. As you can see here, environmental and operations risks were the most important categories. External and organizational risks were the least important. Fish and wildlife risks cover the range of scores, with limited recovery of fish species taking the 6 highest scores in the entire survey. By contrast, ESA listed species presence and stuck wildlife ranked towards the bottom. Stuck wildlife is an example of a highly publicized risk that this sample did not think was important. And I also want to mention, just because ESA listed species presence is ranked towards the bottom of the survey, that doesn't necessarily mean people think that ESAs are less important than these fish species. There is, the wording of the risk is a little bit different. So maybe there's some recognition of that if there's an ESA present on the study site, that's not necessarily that great of a risk compared to if salmon populations fail to recover. Operations and maintenance risks. Tributary blockage ranked among the most important risks and was more important than reservoir plant establishment. Construction risks. The full text of this water quality risk reads, reservoir drawdown impacts water quality more than expected, causing project regulatory shutdown. You could argue that this risk belongs in a different category, but the KRRC register has it here. It's the 10th ranked most important risk on the survey and was more important than the other construction risks. Moving on to external risks. Earthquake was the least important risk on the survey, which to me demonstrates some kind of understanding that risk is likelihood times consequences, and an earthquake, though potentially very consequential, is not very likely. Now, I think it's really interesting that these budget-related risks wound up being ranked towards the bottom of the survey, being not very important, despite causing a lot of conflict in the negotiations and planning phase. A quick zoom in on risks related to water quality here. So as a reminder, this is the first, this water quality risk is about reservoir drawdown impacting water quality to the point where a regulatory shutdown happens. And then on the far left, I included dark colored water as a risk on the survey because I was interested to see if people would be able to tease apart the appearance of the water compared to the quality of the water. And so far that appears to be the case. Water quality did get a higher ranking than a more important rating than dark colored water. So I haven't done a deep dive on the free response questions yet. Those are usually my favorite part of social science surveys. But I'm sure many of you are familiar with these word clouds, which show keywords that are common to people's responses with more frequent words shown in the larger font. The prompt here is, which of these risks were most concerning to you before drawdown and why? So you can see water quality, sediment, fish, salmon, Chinook, coho, habitat, wildlife, lawsuits, all making an appearance here. Oh shoot, that yellow color is really hard to see, huh? All right, next one. Has your thinking about these risks changed since before drawdown? If so, how? Looks like mostly yes. Restoration, sediment again, mud and fish. There's also some really interesting words on this word cloud, like engagement, misinformation, and community. And those really speak to the purpose of this study, which is to facilitate better communication between dam removal planners and the public. Because we've all seen in these last few years, we've all witnessed the gap between scientists, expert knowledge, and general public concerns about dam removal. Finally, are there any other risks that were not listed here? Again, lots of stuff about salmon and restoration, long-term impacts, the future, agencies, operations, presumably of the remaining dams, words across different spatial scales, like local, basin, and coast, and some more words like community, social, misinformation, and perception. So wrapping up here, I'm hoping to expand my sample. I'd love to get in touch with more local residents, water users, tribal members, anyone who has expertise in construction, engineering, or cultural resources, or really anyone who's knowledgeable about the dam removal. So if you have ideas for me, more folks that I could get in touch with, feel free to come find me later today or tomorrow, or feel free to call or email. And lastly, thanks everybody for listening. So this QR code will take you to a copy of the survey, which I've set up specifically for the audience at this conference. I'll be making statistical comparisons between this subgroup and the rest of the sample, so I'll be able to tell if you let my presentation bias your responses. Feel free to contact me with any questions or comments about the survey, or if you want to chat about controlled flow studies or recreation planning or anything like that. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Ben. So we have time for maybe one question if anyone has one. There.
Not really a question, just a comment. I felt like my answers were skewed by the timing of the survey, like because I already knew a lot of the things that had happened. And so I felt like my response of like what the risks were shaped by what the risks had been. And so that was just kind of like an observation. Like I was aware of that as I was filling it out, that like if I'd filled it out before we knew what was going to happen after drawdown, my responses might have been different.
Yeah, thanks for that comment. And I absolutely agree. I was definitely hoping to get this survey out, like a year ago or 2 years ago, but it just didn't work out that way.
All right, one quick question.
Yeah, I was just looking at the wording says what risks are most important to you. And that's like kind of confusing. Like, is that most likely, the thing I'm most concerned about screwing the whole thing up, or would have been had I answered this a year ago? I'm just saying the word, just if I was faced with that, I'd be like, what does that mean? I don't understand what you're getting at.
Sure. So the idea of importance is to be intentionally general a little bit, and to allow people to respond kind of on a whole range of values, instead of responding to asking people to respond in one specific way. Like some people might have a really strong value of tradition or property rights, and so asking about importance lets people respond based on things like that. Or other people might have a really strong value of environmentalism. And again, importance kind of allows people to respond based on that value as well.
Great. All right, thanks, Dan.
Thanks.